Hello, everybody. My name is Stephanie Owino. I am the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Michigan ASLA chapter, and I'm joined here today with Ernest Wong. He is our guest speaker today for our Diverse Perspective webinar series. Our Diverse Perspective webinar series is put together through our our DEI committee, the Michigan ASLA DEI committee, which encourages, promotes, and celebrates diversity, equity, inclusion in our chapter and profession. As a part of our efforts, the Diverse Perspective webinar series aims to highlight minority design students and professionals while providing a platform to share their experiences with the profession, their journey as a landscape architect, and or specific projects that they wish to speak on. I will then share Ernest's bio. So Ernest Wong is founder and principal of SITE. He has been instrumental in the evolution of the firm as a multicultural cutting-edge design entity and fostering the landscape architecture profession in the city of Chicago. In managing the firm for over 33 years, SITE has established a reputation for creative design solutions and developing thoughtful, community-oriented urban spaces. A strong proponent of civic and community engagement, Mr. Wong sits on the board of numerous service organizations and professional juries, including the Dairos Award for Architectural Excellence and Community Design, the Chinese American Service League, and as the chair of the Chicago Landmarks Commission. In addition, Mr. Wong is a frequent speaker at universities, as well as design, business, and diversity conferences. Mr. Wong was recently awarded the 2021 ASLA Community Service Award and the 2021 Daniel H. Burham Distinguished Service Award from the Lambda Alpha International Land Economics Society L chapter. And so we're going to start our webinar. Right after this, we're going to hand it over to Ernest. For the first few minutes, he's going to give his presentation, and then afterwards we'll have a Q&A session. So feel free to submit your questions in the chat, or if you want to wait to the end of it, that's also fine as well. So handing it off to you, Ernest.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah. Thank you, and hello to Michigan ASLA chapter. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much. This is really an honor to speak with all of you. This is always kind of strange for me because I feel like I'm kind of talking to a screen. I also want to give a shout out to Landscape Forums for their sponsorship of this program. So, you know, wonderful folks over there in Kalamazoo. And so I also wanted to say hello to all the folks, the Michigan State University graduates and alumni, as well as, and I have to give out the shout out to University of Michigan as well, as we hire a lot of those folks as well. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Hopefully you can see all this. Am I, is this at full lead?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So I'm going to start this talk, and I have been doing this a little while with a thing called Pachakacha, and it is a 20 slides, 20 seconds per slide, hopefully so nobody gets bored here. And I do this because I had been, some of you may have already seen this. If you have listened to some of my other lectures, you may have seen this, so this will be a repeat for you. But I do this because this was a method of presenting where you have a limited amount of time. And it was developed by Japanese architects in Tokyo in order to get through a presentation rather quickly. And my staff kept on asking me to do this, and I refused to do it for a number of times. until one of my staff members ended up doing it. Well, a few staff members ended up doing it. So one of our design principals, Hana Ishikawa from Tokyo, ended up doing it. And then one of our other staff members, Samantha Shui, she ended up doing it and knocked it out of the park in front of this incredible audience in Chicago. And I was pretty much shamed into doing this. So here we go. I'm gonna go through this. Oh boy, you know what? I am unprepared. Give me 2 seconds. I'll be right back.
While Ernie is away, I did want to also mention that, yes, this particular webinar is being sponsored by Landscape Forums. So we want to say our thank you to Landscape Forums for sponsoring this webinar, as well as supporting the Michigan ASLA Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee.
Here we go. How embarrassing is that? This is why my grades were never good at state. Okay, here we go. Okay. I'm a landscape architect. I discovered this profession midway through college while wandering back and forth from architecture to wilderness survival to the hospitality industry. Actually, I always wanted to be Smokey the Bear, but that never really happened. Watching people in public spaces was way more interesting. I'm also a Chinese American that's still discovering my heritage and culture. In this country, we have a short and controversial history. My parents immigrated to this country in the late 1940s to gain an education, hoping to go back to China to help rebuild their country after World War II. My dad was born in the Haiphong County of Guangdong Province in southern China. His father was a landowner who was assassinated during the early communist movement in China. The village was burned to the ground, and my father, at age 7, escaped to Hong Kong with one of his father's bodyguards. This is his mother and his brother, my uncle, who he didn't see for over 50 years. My mother was born in Hong Kong. Her father was one of Dr. Sun Yat-sen's financiers during the end of the Qing dynasty in China. Her mother was a principal of a girls' school in Guangzhou. By age 6, my mother was an orphan. She made it through her childhood, eventually making it to Duke University's medical school. My parents met in Durham, North Carolina, and got married at Duke University's chapel. My mom still claims that she only married my dad because he had a car. Then again, being the only 2 Chinese people in North Carolina in the early 1950s, you probably needed a car to get out. But my mom, you know, she was kind of a gold digger. My dad came to this country because he had a fellowship to study with Frank Lloyd Wright. He couldn't get his visa out of China that year, so the following year, in 1948, he got his visa, was on his way to Taliesin, and stopped in Chicago. He ran into a German architect named Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, and he never left. Mies is now known as the father of modern architecture. Mies's English and my dad's English were both pretty bad, so they sat around drawing and detailing Mies's projects. That's my dad on the left and Mies on the right at the iconic Farnsworth House while it was under construction. Mies may have been complaining to my dad about Edith, the client, who was apparently one of those clients. In 1959, my father started his firm, YC Wong and Associates, capitalizing on the acclaim of the award-winning atrium homes in the Hyde Park neighborhood in Chicago. He followed that up with several other acclaimed projects, earning his fellowship with the AIA in 1975. His practice made a mark in Chicago housing, never sacrificing quality for cost. While Mom was working at Michael Reese Hospital, then at the University of Illinois Chicago Medical School, the kids were growing up in Kenwood, trying to figure out their lives in the 1970s, a turbulent time in the United States and in Chicago. Fitting in was always interesting, as we were neither Black or white in this urban neighborhood. I discovered entrepreneurial means to keep things real. My older brother is a fashion photographer, my older sister is an artist, and my younger sister manages jazz artists in New York. My folks were pretty disappointed. When they got together with their Chinese friends, they pretended we weren't their kids. No doctor, no lawyer, no accountant or engineer. Their kids weren't really Chinese. Dad was an exacting man. When I began working for him, he'd make me draw every brick on the building elevation. English font, every sixth row with a header course. If my lines weren't straight or I overshot an intersection or lines didn't meet, he would tear up the entire sheet and make me redraft the entire elevation. When Robert and I started our practice, we held to those principles of accurate and precise work, quality construction specifications, deliberate and careful design standards. When we had the opportunity to design Pingtown Memorial Park 21 years ago, we did our best to uphold those standards and raise the bar of excellence. A week before the park opened, I walked my dad through the park explaining the design. He looked down and he never said a word. He didn't have to say what he thought. He was pissed that I became a landscape architect, and he was even more appalled that I would attempt to design a Chinese park when I knew nothing about the culture. His disappointment was deafening. He passed away a year later. When I earned my fellowship with the American Society of Landscape Architects in 2014, I refrained from telling my mom the news. When I finally told her weeks later, there was silence, followed by, "What took you so long? Your father received his when he was 45. Why are you so slow?" Maybe it's a Chinese thing. I'll never be good enough. I'll never receive the approval from my parents, and I'll carry that chip on my shoulder for the rest of my life. I'll always be compared to Joachim Lee, now the head of the medical school at the University of California, San Francisco. That's me on the far left, looking for some other parents to adopt me. When Denise and I started our family, we would expose our kids to a lot of things: play sports, make music, get to know your cousins, ride public transportation, go to public school, walk in the woods, get some thug friends, eat different foods, sing in the choir. One of the things we obviously forgot to teach them was to act their age. They were really cute when they were kids. I tried not to yell or beat them too much, and I never understood the dynamic with my dad and them. He was so gentle and caring. He never ripped up their drawings or made them peel shrimp until their hands bled. Why didn't they get that tough love that everyone talks about? I never got to the Farnsworth house when my dad was alive. I finally went a year after he passed away. I was blown away by the beauty and the elegance of the design. I was struck by the colors of the leaves and the gentleness of the land. I tried to imagine what Mies and my father were thinking as the structure went up. My kids are adults now. They're certainly not following in another generation of design. One is a mechanical engineer. The other one wants to track serial killers with FBI. I am proud of them that they're making their own way through life. Their childhood was not as disruptive as mine, and certainly wasn't as harsh as my parents endured. They're much more sensitive to what's at stake now: a very polarized country, climate change, and a quickly changing geopolitical environment. They're smart and their friends are smart. Whether they can save the world is yet to be determined, but they'll need our help and our support. So I guess I should start by telling them that I love them. So I want to talk a little bit about Asians, the history of Asians in America. As they started out, when particularly the Chinese were coming to this country, they were here to really help build the railroad system that connected the East and Western United States. And that was through the mid to late 1800s. Here's some photos of Chicago's Chinatown right around in the 1920s. But it had started actually in the south loop of the Central District area in Chicago, but moved further south as the real estate prices continued to squeeze them out. And one of the things that I always talk about is how Asians in America, whether the Filipinos that actually started with the migrant workers in California, along with the Latino and Chicano migrant workers, to the Japanese who were here and then got interned during World War II, have always been looked at as perpetual foreigners, meaning that my parents specifically always were very aware of how people looked at them, that they would never assimilate fully into American life. And so it was really difficult for them, and they ended up bringing up all of their children not speaking Chinese. They wanted us to assimilate very, very quickly into American society. And it was, it's one of the regrets that I have now in still searching for my own identity. But it's one of those things that I think was important to understand and how that kind of evolved. And so what do we think now? There is this term called model minority that has been placed upon a lot of Asians, which is actually really pretty denigrating to us in the terms of it's a way of people trying to drive a wedge between Asians and other minorities, specifically African American and Latinx people, and saying, by the way, here's a minority group that can achieve so much, and look at them, they work so hard, and they are engineers, and they can do this, that, the other. But the thing is, what people don't recognize is that there is a huge population that is still homeless in the Filipino community, who so many of them are nurses, but so many of them also can't even get health insurance. It's crazy to understand what that really means. But this whole term of model minority is really a very tough issue for us. And so we've been kind of trying to disintegrate that saying and teaching people how difficult that is when you start to utilize that those terms. But I want to talk about the design community. And here are some of the success stories of some of the folks that have achieved a lot in the design community. And folks like I.M. Pei, who designed the Louvre in Paris, and Minoru Yamasaki, who did some incredible designs, and unfortunately also did the Twin Towers in New York City, which were destroyed with those planes, the plane crashes. Osamu Noguchi, who's so famous for his work in the landscape architecture community. Gyo Obata of Helmut Obata Kesselbaum, HOK, which does all of the premier, their firm does all the premier sports stadiums throughout the entire country. Hideo Sasaki, who was so responsible for so many things, and I'm sure everybody in this room kind of knows about Sasaki. But there are also people like Maya Lin, who became famous during the Vietnam War Memorial and has done incredible work throughout the US since that. She's kind of a recluse. It's very hard to get hold of her. But I will say that the work that she's done in Grand Rapids and the skating rink, as well as the University of Michigan, the hills that she has done, that landscape has been really famous as well. And then, of course, Mi Kyung Kim, who have always made these indelible marks in American design. Kanjian Yu, who ended up going back to China and really starting a very prolific firm, is so internationally famous now. It's just incredible, some of the work that he continues and his firm continues to do. But I also wanted to do a shout out to those who have continued in academia. Mark Lee now heads up the Harvard GSD, and I wanted to give the shout out to Minghan Lee and Junhyun Kim for leading the way at Michigan State University. I did a lecture not too long ago at Michigan State University after not being there for 35, almost 40 years. And the whole reason I came back is because of them. Where are we now? And we're still looking at these numbers, but most of the landscape architecture programs and architecture programs in major universities have a high number of international born students. And this enrollment really is so important to these programs because they raise the revenue incredibly. And while at the same time, there's incredible talent that goes along with that. But we also look at where are these graduates going. The majority of these internationally born students are doing a couple of different things. They're leaving the US because of visa and immigration challenges. A lot of them have either gone back to their home country and started their own firms, or they are doing whatever they're doing to gain citizenship in the US and not in landscape architecture and not in architecture. And they're also leaving these professions for higher paying jobs, such as coding and that kind of thing. The ones that are staying in the profession are entering the workforce, and they're trying to assimilate into US culture. And in the US, the design firms are mainly white male-led firms. And so reaching leadership levels is very difficult to attain, whether that's due to politics, whether that's due to implicit bias or cultural stereotypes. It's a difficult piece to navigate. And then when you add in the lack of roadmaps for growth, the lack of coaching and mentorship, these goals of leadership becomes almost unattainable. And that's what we call the bamboo ceiling. So as an Asian, we have some disadvantages, and especially if you're internationally born, you have some disadvantages in American society, even assimilating it there. And I want to talk about some of those issues. This is one in a transaction. The American way of doing a transaction is I give you money, you give me a product, we're all good. Transaction in Asia is not looked at upon that way. Asians look at a transaction as the start of a relationship. And so there's this long-term effect. And one of the things that you'll see in particularly in Asia is there's a product which has a price on it, and the first thing that an Asian is going to do is going to lowball that price, and then they start arguing about the price, and then we finally come to a settlement. But that's part of the relationship. That's the start of the relationship, and which also means okay, I'm going to give you this money, but I'm going to also ask for something later. So there's always that. There's this cultural difference in managing people, which is a whole different ballgame. Those in America, when we're managing people, we kindly ask them to do the task. Take your time. Can I buy you lunch? And thank you so much for doing this and this 5-minute exercise and taking the time out to do this. I hope I didn't impose on you feeding your cat. In Asia, that ain't happening, okay? In Asia, it's like, I don't care what you're doing, drop it, get to my task. I don't care if it takes you 1,000,000 hours, but it better be done on my desk by tomorrow. No, make that tonight. And there's this whole thing in Asia they call 996. It is working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. And so what they're saying, well, why is it? That's just brutal. That is just, not a way to manage people. And there is a couple things that there's some reasons behind that. One of them is that the population in Asia is very large. And so therefore the competition for certain spots is very difficult. So there is a sense of, if I work hard, I will make it to the top. But Americans also see that too. And so there is this tendency to say, okay, well, you're used to working hard, so why don't you just stay, a few more hours at night and work on this project. And by the way, I've also noticed that you just don't complain about things. And so, it is tough because, even for all of us who are, trying to deal with some of the mental health issues and stress that I'm sure other people have talked about, Asians keep that stuff within themselves. I mean, when I had problems, I would never talk about it. I would just go home and I'd stew about it. And in a typical Asian family, particularly, it's very, very frustrating. There is a lot of domestic abuse in Asian families. There's a lot of trauma in these Asian families that people just don't talk about. And that's part of trying to assimilate into American life. English as a second language is difficult to understand. And it's not just the words themselves, but the undertone, the sarcasm, and sometimes outright lies that are told to each other. And so, it just becomes really toxic, where, this whole thing, we now have these terms called gaslighting, mansplaining. But there's this outright lack of civility that we're also learning from our politicians in shaping the way we communicate with each other. And there's a passive aggressiveness that goes on. And so as confusing as our catchphrases are, the tone in which they're delivered can also be really misleading. Culturally, Asians look at growth as a long-term game. Learning is lifelong. It requires practice and discipline and long-term strategies. Americans want immediate gratification, and I showed this picture of TikTok, which is under fire right now. And the reason why is, this is a Chinese app that in China, when you use TikTok, your phone, the app itself would automatically turn off after about 14 hours of use. And then for kids under the age of, I think 16 it is, that they can only watch TikTok videos on their phones if it has something to do with math or science or something that's educational. And then, for the rest of the world, the Chinese have also put out what we call the opium method, because they figure, well, you aren't disciplined enough to put your own restrictions on it. Therefore, you're just going to go and become addicted to and sit there and watch TikTok videos for the rest of the night, wake up tomorrow morning, and that's your problem. That's the same thing with the long-term game in investment in places like Africa and South America, in investing in infrastructure, in building the roads. And it's not charity. This is not charity. This is business. And they're providing jobs and they're providing work, and these countries are prospering. But the long-term game there is, can you prosper enough to be able to pay back these loans? And if not, the long-term game is, well, then we're going to take that over. So, going back to history, Henry Kissinger, who was Richard Nixon's Secretary of State, he came to a conclusion and said, in Eastern culture, when you go to battle with somebody, it is not like Western culture. In Western culture, you go to battle with somebody, you try to wipe out everybody. It's like a game of chess. You take everybody out. In Eastern culture, it's like the Japanese game of Go, where there's advantages and disadvantages, but you are not wiping out everybody. You have this understanding that there is this connectiveness in the world, that somebody's going to have an advantage at some point and somebody's going to have a disadvantage at some time. So the question comes up of, how do we become successful? And the question also is, what is success? And I was thinking about this, and I was talking to a couple of people, and it dawned on me that the way we look at success is this image. I mean, this was really the thought that, success is defined by white male success, having having that privilege. And so it's an interesting thing to realize. And success can be defined by all kinds of different things. But subconsciously, this is really what we look at as success. So I've often talked about the skill set that people need in order to be successful in anything they do, whether it's in design or whether it's in selling cars. You either have to sell something or you have to be able to manage people. And selling something is, I talked about that whole transactional piece, is understanding that relationship building and developing that over time. So if you're good at doing that, you start to become successful. If you're able to manage people, that's another form of success, because you're able to get people to do things for you. And it's not because of your title or and I talk about managing people, either whether you're doing it through privilege or you're doing it through objectivity and fairness. And the fairness part of it is who can achieve whatever it is. And there's, of course, there's the politics of it. But if you can do both, you're on your way to leadership. And beyond the 10,000 hours it takes to be good at something, you have to be able to show confidence and humility. Simultaneously, you have to be aware of yourself and your surroundings and be socially adaptable. Nobody shows you these things in school, so we learn these things in the professional world. But the thing that they also don't teach you about is being curious. And I also think that being curious is one of those things that makes you successful. If you are curious about anything and everything, that includes watching nature shows or being interested in finance or looking at law or whatever. You don't, just because you're a design professional does not necessarily mean that you can't explore other things. And if you are curious about these things, you're able to actually socially talk about them. And that brings success as well. There's this whole thing about community involvement. I believe that success is also getting involved with your own community, whatever that may be. It could be your sports club, it could be an affinity group at work, it could be your neighborhood cooking club. But you learn how to work with people, and learning from each other can be powerful and it can be uplifting. Here's the other thing, and this is tough. If you find something that you are an expert on, and that is something that nobody else has really thought about, or you pick something that you are really, really, really good at, you become an expert on it, and you do things like speaking engagements, like I'm doing right now. Not that I'm an expert on it, I'm just saying that you start to build that brand, and you start to add value to who you are as a person, which will escalate you to higher places. Ultimately, though, landscape architecture is moving more and more towards urban design and building communities. There's a whole lot of more emphasis on public engagement for not only determining the basis of site programming and design, but it's also understanding these communities and understanding what their needs are. And it may be, that you are designing something that does not fit with the community, or the community is not always going to get everything they ask for, but at least you've listened. And that's part of the piece here too, active listening. I talked about, developing designs from, we're used to developing these designs in a bubble, but now we're being much more like psychologists and social workers, and frankly, being politicians. We're being asked to listen to people and translate these ideas onto boards and gain consensus. So we do a lot of that. And one of the things that's overlooked as well is the engagement with youth. And, we underestimate their ability, but I will tell you, kids nowadays and folks, I know that you folks that are listening here are way smarter than I was when I was growing up. And so, there's a whole lot more talent there and if we get stuck in the old ways of doing things, it's not going to work very well. But the tough part is that every community is different. Every community has their own personal history and nuances, and they all have their different needs. So what does this all mean? So my take on this is that as an Asian American, I have my own personal history of my family in this country. I'm continuing to search for my own identity as a Chinese American. But my stories and my experiences gives me an insight to other immigrant families and other non-white populations. My experiences at Michigan State University also gave me an insight to my first exposure to a predominantly white middle-class America. But collectively, these experiences have benefited me to be able to relate and empathize with a wide variety, wide range of populations. And all of it is really authentic. And that's the other thing that, I don't just say it just to appease other people. That's not the case. If I don't believe it, I'm not going to say it. But I do want to really learn about what other communities think. So my message to all of you is to continue to examine your own history and your experiences. Examine your own family's history, as well as your ancestors' histories, in an effort to gain a direction for how you continue to navigate a complex world. Whether this impacts the way you approach your work and your profession, I'm hoping that as a human species, we can both celebrate our differences and come together and celebrate who we are and evolve our planet in a better direction. So I'm going to end this with some of these images of the work that we've done throughout the Chicagoland area and other places. But I also wanted to give Stephanie the opportunity to show a short film that we've done as well. So with that, I'm giving this back to you, Stephanie.
All right, let me turn this video on real quick. Okay. All right, can you guys see that? We're good. Okay.
Even though I wasn't raised in Chinatown, I was raising my family here in Chinatown. My kids learned to ride their bike on a busy sidewalk. I had friends that grew up in Chinatown. They would play volleyball using a fence at the schoolyard, and so basically the sidewalk was their playground for many years. Seeing how so many generations of kids kind of grew up without a park, I think it's something the community really needed. It was probably the first time that the community really got together and asked the city, we lost our park. It's time to restore it and rebuild it.
My dad, along with some of his friends, wanted to expand Chinatown. The Santa Fe Railroad was willing to sell some land to my dad and the company that he started. And along with that, he wanted to see if there could be a park as part of that project.
How do we start to really connect with the cultural aspects of this park? That's where we really started with this whole effort, was looking at classical and traditional Chinese garden design. You keep on discovering these landscapes as you move through these courtyards, and these series of courtyards.
Our park is kind of bisected in the middle by the 18th Street Bridge. Those walls near 18th Street were always either filled with graffiti or just painted over. Raised enough money to paint 3 of the 4 walls that are under 18th Street. It just represented that, even though we're from different places, we could be one.
When you got to the edge of the river, there was a 15-foot drop from land to the river. And people do gravitate towards water. Part of this was carving away a much more gentler sloping edge that people could access the river even easier. There's this whole balancing the site of digging out areas, yet taking that soil and being able to mound it up and create better topography.
I think that there's such a weird trajectory of what happens when there's a general lack of places for healthy activity, but also for a sense of safety. we tried to hold this like very special event a couple years ago where we invited the community to plant native plants into the park. There was a sense of community. There were so many people that like they were helping each other out. That is what a true community is all about.
We are in a field that historically has been for rich people doing the estates and, English gardens and French gardens, and to transform that into something that the everyday person can experience, I think is really important. Good design and the quality of design should be for everyone, not only the quality of design in the industry, but the social aspect of it. How does this start to impact other people's lives? So when we do a park on the west side of Chicago, that used to be drug infested with needles all over the place, and that kid, and we put in a new playground, and 20 years from now, that kid says to his friend, hey, remember that park that we were at, and we did this, and we dreamed about this. You impacted that kid's life. And that's powerful to me. That's something that I am very passionate about.
This park is making a difference in people's lives.
Unfortunately, we didn't have the music on
Oh,
throughout that. I couldn't hear it.
no. Really? You guys didn't hear anything at all?
We couldn't hear the music. I couldn't hear the music.
Oh, the music. Did you hear the people speaking?
Yeah, the people speaking we heard.
Okay.
Which carried it through, and that was the message, really. The music just gave it a lot more flavor.
Oh,
But
I
anyway,
apologize for that, you all. But we'll share that link as well, so you all can watch it after the webinar.
yeah, that'd be great.
Yes.
But anyway,
Oh, go ahead.
I am, that's part of our experiences, and I would love to take on any questions that anybody may have.
Yes. So we are now open for questions. We have a question currently from Jordan Chang with EDSA in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Do you have any advice for seeking and connecting with other Asian Americans in landscape architecture as mentors or an expanded network?
Yeah, that is one of the things actually. And EDSA has, you guys are huge. Actually, I was on the call earlier today with Kona Gray, and we talk about that a lot, about mentorship, and I think that it's important to find someone that you can that can help guide you in the way you do things, but it doesn't always have to be in landscape architecture or architecture for that matter. If there's somebody that is pretty successful, it's just spending the time with them. So there was during the pandemic, there was a young man that reached out to me. Well, first of all, I should probably tell you that one of the things that I do is I'm very involved with the Chinatown community here in Chicago. So I serve on the board of the Chinatown Chamber of Commerce. I also serve on the board of the Chinese American Service League, which is a social service agency based here in Chicago. And so my other board members are mainly business people, but they're lawyers, they're doctors, they're people in all walks of life. And that connection, I think, is really helpful. It's helpful also for you to expose what you do as a profession to other people who have no idea of what landscape architecture is or urban design or the things that you do. So Jordan, my advice to you is, there are a lot of people with the same experiences as you. You get to know them. So my story, though, was that, through that network, there was a young man who came to me from Vancouver, who had moved to Chicago, him and his wife. And I ended up putting him in touch with the Chinese American Service League, the social service agency, and he joined the associate board there. But this young man is just incredible. And he has a background in real estate development. He was won all kinds of things in jazz piano. He was one of these guys that were just amazing. And I ended up helping his wife get a job in one of the healthcare institutions in a Latino community. And so, it's just, you seek out people, you help each other, they start to improve your network, and you just continue from there. So don't lock yourself into just landscape architecture. And frankly, Jordan, if you reach out to me, I'd be happy to chat with you about anything. So.
Oh, you see that plug in there, Jordan? Get on it. Awesome. That's so dope. Yeah, and I would also mention, I know ASLA has a mentorship program, so that's also another resource that you guys can use. I believe you're able to also, include information about, specifically of who you would like your mentor to be, or to identify with your preferences.
Yeah. So Lisa, hi, so good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. Her question, in light of the recent and growing legislative moves to remove DEI programs from higher learning communities, programs that create spaces for storytelling, we got to keep telling our stories. And we have to continue that whether or not folks want to hear it or not. And I think that's one of the things that are going to have to continue. If they don't want to sanction it, then I'm still going to talk about it. And, we don't live yet in an authoritarian society. And until that time comes and you want to put me in jail, I'm going to keep on talking about it. So, I was just talking to somebody in, it's funny because Jordan, you're at EDSA, and what is it, then NAACP just put out a travel advisory to folks of color to not go to Florida, because your governor decided to run for president and is saying just incredibly ignorant things. That's the kind of stuff that is under fire for us, understanding and knowing our own identity. And the other thing that I'm going to continue to preach here is that all of us as people of color need to continue to band together and speak as a singular voice, and not let things like the model minority disenfranchise us and put us off to the side, because I think that's it's something that we just have to be really aware of. Mm-hmm. So thank you, Wendy.
The follow-up question was, how do you think this will impact our ability to continue such dialogues in cultural education? Is that, you have more to add?
Yeah, I mean, there are going to be people that are going to continue to silence us. And, as far as I'm concerned, we still have the freedom of the press and freedom of speech. And even though, the part of the problem is that we also have figured out that there's so much media out there saying, with different falsehoods that are out there. We just have to continue our own voices and telling your own story. People are going to try to want to silence us, and they're going to not want to tell the story of how America was built and the truth behind that. So.
Yeah, I'll definitely say continue with storytelling, whether in the profession, outside the profession, share your truth, be honest about your truth. You know, that's how we're gonna keep people
And,
educated.
and it's funny that you actually, you talk about that a lot because I just heard about this movie about the Osage tribe in Oklahoma.
Hmm.
The movie that Martin Scorsese just did that is going to be very impactful. It just showed at the Cannes Festival and got a standing ovation on just, the indigenous people of this country. One of the reasons they continue to survive is because they have that ability to continue to tell their stories.
Yep.
So we have to continue that as well.
Well, those were the two questions we had at the point, but I did have a couple that I wanted to kind of point out. You talked about how your father had his visa to study for Frank Lloyd Wright, how he worked with Mr.
Mies
Vander.
van der Rohe, yeah.
Yes. So did he eventually get to work with Frank Lloyd Wright?
No, he kind of goes to Frank.
Okay, got it.
Frank was, and let me tell you, if you read stories about Frank Lloyd Wright, he wasn't the nicest person in the world either. So, I think my father and my whole family is better off with that.
Okay, noted. Got that down. Even just like your father, his firm, YC Wong firm, you
Yeah.
talked about how you worked with him. Did that help influence your design background or like you finding?
It did, Stephanie. That's a great question. And one of the things that I found when I left Michigan State University, I actually had offers to go to JKR, and I had an offer to go to Land Design Collaborative in Virginia, I think at that time, before they got bought out by whoever they got bought out by. But I chose to go back to Chicago and learn architecture from my father. And that's that whole piece about curiosity. And part of it was, I also knew my dad was going to kick my ass. And, I was ready for that. I was like, okay, let's go to it. But it was going to be a learning experience for me that I am not formally trained in, but it was going to teach me that discipline and understanding of things outside of landscape architecture, such as mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, and structural engineering, and other things that are curtain wall designs and things like that I find fascinating. And to be honest with you, has led to me wanting to become a little bit more of a developer as well. So,
Interesting.
little side project.
Learning so much. You talk about being curious. I think that was a cool and important part to talk about, but just also being curious about things in our profession, in our community, and just things unrelated. Like that's how we find ourselves. That's how we find our interests. So also about public speaking and networking as students, emerging professionals in general. Adding value to yourself, practicing your skills, building your confidence. And I think the biggest point is like using your voice and using it to expand yourself, but also to speak your truth.
Yes.
I thought was just really dope.
Yeah. Here's a question from Taewook Cha from Supermass Studio in ASLA, New York. What is the biggest challenge AAPI landscape architects are facing at emerging professional level, at mid-career level, and at leadership level?
Question.
So, that's a great question. Emerging professionals, you have to learn your skill. You have to understand what you need to do to get your job, to be good at your job. At a mid-career level, you should start to experiment with learning what your voice is and starting to be able to articulate that in a lot of different ways, not only just by your skill in drawing, but being able to tell that story. Because if you're able to tell that story of your design, you're starting to evolve there. At a leadership level, again, you've got to start to be able to sell, get projects for the company. You have to be able to manage people, all those kinds of things, those skill sets. There's a lot of leadership skills that comes with experience, but it's also empathy as well, you know, so leadership is really doing some self-reflection and being fair to people, to be honest with you. So don't buy into the politics, because that's what everybody wants you to buy into. You know, it's like if you suck up to somebody, you know, they're gonna elevate you. That may be true, but watch out for that. You don't have to do it. Just be aware of it.
That's some good advice to students graduating. Be mindful of those type of things. Well, those were all the questions that we had at this moment. Just want to take the time to thank you again, Ernie, for spending your time with us with the Michigan chapter and being a part of our diversity webinar series. And we just appreciate your time. Also, just want to mention again, thank you to Landscape Forums for sponsoring this webinar. Did you have any last words, Ernie?
It's fun coming home. Yes. I spent a lot of years in Michigan, and it is home to me actually in Chicago, but my second home being in Michigan. But I appreciate all the things that I've learned when I was in Michigan, and on top of the things that I learned from my father, working with Mick Duell in Birmingham, Michigan, in his practice, and working with some incredible people, I think has really formulated, a lot of my practice and the things that I've learned over the years. So I appreciate it all, and I thank all of you. And summer's coming, please enjoy it. So take care, everybody.
Can't wait. All right, we will see you all. The webinar will be up shortly on our website, michiganasla.org. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Until then, see y'all.
Cool. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.